Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Coffee and Contemplation brought to you by Spotlight Recovery. I'm your host, Lucas, and it is April 7th. Yes, it is April 7th. I am tired, so I'm putting out the video late, but either way, here we go. Got a good reflection today. It's from the NA, A Spiritual Principle a Day, which is another really cool reflections book that I actually just found recently, and I'm really quite enjoying it. Talking all about vulnerability. Ugh. So don't worry, we're in it together. I'll bring it up here and let's take a look and see what sticks out for you. So April 7th, vulnerability teaches us to trust. Each time we make ourselves vulnerable and find someone there for us, we come to a new level of safety and trust. From Living Clean, Chapter 5, Fellowship. Working Step 5 with a sponsor can feel like barring our underbellies. Bearing. We summon up enough honesty, humility, and courage to admit the exact nature of our wrongs. Despite our conviction that we're doing the right thing, sharing our inventories can make us feel exposed. Being vulnerable can be an unnatural state for addicts. It tears down our hardened defenses. Sharing our inventory is an act of trust. For many of us, this may be the first time we reveal ourselves completely to another human being. Whether we have years clean or days, we find value in sharing our struggles and our victories with fellow members. Being real and sometimes raw creates opportunities for others to connect with us. Sharing from the heart simply resonates. We're often humbled by the kindness of our fellowship who support us. Wow. We're often humbled by the kindness of our fellow members who support us when we are most vulnerable. Each time we take a risk, open up, and are met with loving support from other members, we understand the strength and vulnerability on a deeper level. I look at this kind of vulnerability as the emotional equivalent of a trust fall, one member shared. Each act of vulnerability enhances our feelings of safety in our relationships. The more we practice connecting with other members, the more at home we feel in NA. I will challenge my old beliefs about trust. I will push myself out of my comfort zone to practice being vulnerable and allow other members the opportunity to be there for me. Yeah, so there's a lot of good stuff in here. Even just that general topic of vulnerability, I really like and I really appreciate a lot because it's just something that stands out for us so much. That's so important in recovery, just because addiction typically is the opposite of that. We're a lot more guarded. And I think a really big one, especially for a lot of us NA folks, is we put on the masks. So like we're the social chameleon, not just the social butterfly, I think the social chameleon. So that we can disguise ourselves as a butterfly. When really it's just, what version of myself do I want you to see? What version am I going to show today, basically? And then depending on what social situation I'm in, I'm going to alter myself. Like which version of me you're going to see, who's showing up to what party, and so on and so forth. And that's while we're still being social, until then bottoming out where there is none of that, and we're usually very isolated or stuck in whatever drug house with maybe the same people we're using with or not, So vulnerability is very opposite of all of this in a lot of ways, and it is so important for us in recovery, because ultimately, if we're not being vulnerable, then there's a chance that we are hiding something. We're still hanging on to something. We're not letting all of our truths out entirely. And whatever reservations we have are things that eventually we are going to use over. I'm sure this sounds familiar to you in some form or another. And if you're brand new and this is the first time you're hearing it, then that's totally fine. It's a really important lesson to learn. So definitely make note of this. Any reservations we have, anything we're still hanging on to, has the potential for us to use over. That's something that can still be holding power over us. It puts our recovery at risk. It puts us in a much higher chance of relapse. And if you're like me, when you come into recovery, you cannot afford to relapse. Relapse most likely will equal death, and we're not worth taking that chance or that risk. So we have to safeguard this. And this is what I was talking about just the other day in another one of these videos about guarding our recovery. So it's ironic that how being vulnerable is actually how we're guarding our recovery. And it talks about it here. the line about well, it's something about like our hardened defenses. Yeah. Middle of the first paragraph here. Being vulnerable can be an unnatural state for addicts. It tears down our hardened defenses. And even that's pretty like strong language. For me, I'd think it's more I'm like choosing to put my defenses aside, or I'm choosing to let them down. I'm not destroying them. I'm choosing to let them down to be vulnerable with you. As a result of that, I am actually protecting my recovery by taking this action. And so it's funny how it seems kind of counterintuitive or like they don't go together, but for us, they really do. So that's one big benefit of this, an important piece that I wanted to cover and talk about, is that concept of being vulnerable is something that actually protects our recovery. And, with, of course, the right people in the right meetings, the right spaces, of course, pick and choose who to be vulnerable with. Don't just start blabbing your sob story to that poor person in the grocery line behind you while you're waiting. No. So you pick the right time and place to do this. But when you do, and then are vulnerable and sharing these things, that's how you're actually protecting your recovery, strengthening it, so on and so forth. So that's one piece about this that I think is really cool, like a general thing about recovery, and it's really important to talk about. So I'm glad they did on this page. So there's one. I love this opening line, I think is really good. Each time we make ourselves vulnerable and find someone there for us, we come to a new level of safety and trust. I mean, trust and trusting people, I think for a lot of us, it pretty self-explanatory. It takes time, it takes practice, repetition. A lot of us have been, I think, just if you're a human being on this planet, this isn't even an addict thing, human thing, you have been burned by somebody, you have been vulnerable and hurt, you have trust broken. So that's just like a normal human thing. So I think it's important to acknowledge and realize that, and not feel too sorry for yourself, not sit and, oh gosh, that was one of my biggest old moves, was play the victim. Oh man. Ooh, I loved playing the victim. Victim was like, that was one of my favorite cards. So it's important to not sit and play the victim. Oh, this is why I'm so untrustworthy and that's so sad and all this stuff. Therefore, I'm never going to trust again. Like, okay, let's tone down the drama a little bit. It happens to all of us. Some stories are more extreme than others, and it's not to take away from your experience. It's just to understand that you have your unique experience, and so does everybody else. And in recovery, if you want to quit doing what you're doing and find that better way of life, this is something you're absolutely going to have to work on. And I mean, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you want to? Because it's holding you back. It's holding you back. It's getting in the way. It's stopping you from building new, healthier, better relationships with others as well as with yourself. You're not experiencing life and all the things that life has to offer because of these things. So why would you not want to do it? So there's a couple of perspectives on that piece. But anyway, with this quote, we come to a new level of safety and trust. So these are things we build. You develop them. And the only way you can do that is by practicing this. Taking that step, choosing to be vulnerable. You have to do that as that first step, and then be finding the right, like I said, people, meetings, spaces where you can be vulnerable, and then be working at this stuff some more. So that's a really important piece, but it's how we do it. It's just like these little steps. And then over time, the more we share, the right people, the right spaces, we keep doing it, and things are getting better. We're getting good feedback. Bad things aren't happening as a result of being vulnerable. That's how we start to build this. It's those little building blocks. Like I was kind of showing that staircase. It's these little things that we build up towards. It's not something that's just going to happen overnight or be a flip switch. So it's doing this work is how, like it says, vulnerability teaches us to trust. That's how that happens. Now, the second paragraph, I'm just going through the rest of the reading here again, skimming over it. So the second paragraph, this mentions another really important piece that I really like. Second line, being real and sometimes raw creates opportunities for others to connect with us. Sharing from the heart simply resonates. And I'm just looking on the bottom because there's this point here I want to make. I just want to see if it's connected somewhere else. Okay, it is not. So I'm just going to throw it out there. So those lines are great. Like sometimes raw, or if you're like me, super raw all the time. I was like a raw exposed nerve for my first while in recovery there. And even still now, I'm just a very sensitive person. I'm very sensitive and very emotional. I'm getting a lot better handle of my emotions, or like letting myself feel and experiencing them without all the defects of character and doing damage as a result of them. So, but anyway, sometimes raw creates opportunities for others to connect with us. So if you're wondering, oh, how do I let people in more? Why don't people talk to me? Why are they standoffish or whatever? Well, then maybe try this. Maybe try being a little vulnerable with somebody and seeing what happens. This is another great way to be able to let people in, because you got to understand, and especially if they're addicts too, there's a really good chance that they're just as scared and as nervous as you are about the concept of connecting and of being vulnerable with each other, right? So if you both have that same fear, then one of you has to take that first step. So why not let it be you? So if you take that step and then you choose to be vulnerable with this person, you're now giving them permission to do the same. You are letting them know this is a safe space. This is the kind of vibe that I am going for, wanting to talk to you about. And so it's kind of like you're reaching your hand out in that sense, which then allows that other person to do the same. So not only, like it says, to connect with you, the point that I wanted to cover that I wish they established a bit more in this reflection is that it then allows that person to be vulnerable too. This reflection is very self-focused and all on us being vulnerable, the benefits that we get from being vulnerable. But there's a whole other piece out of this that's missing. And that is, by us being vulnerable, we are then giving permission to others around us so that they can be vulnerable too. Not permission as in like we're so grandiose and powerful, but we're taking that first step. Like I said, that is what shows people that they can do the same thing. You're being vulnerable with them, they can do the same thing back with you. And that's a really important piece about this with vulnerability, with trust, that I wanted to mention with this, because it's also very much step 12 aligned. By taking that step and being vulnerable, you then let others be vulnerable with you too. So that's how you're carrying the message. That's how you're being of service. You're helping other people be vulnerable for themselves and with their own shit, which is really beautiful. It's really in line with like one of my favorite Marianne Williamson quotes, where she talks about by liberating ourselves, that allows then others to be liberated as well, allows them to liberate themselves too. Something along those lines. Word for word, I mess it up every time. But just that feeling, that messaging behind it. So anyway, that's just a whole other beautiful piece around vulnerability that I think is really important that I wanted to share. And it's just like, here's my little hippie segment for it. But it's like, well, if we all just be more vulnerable with each other, then we can all deepen and strengthen these connections and let these things out, and then work on some of those old trust issues and things we had to then just make that progress and heal from them all. It's like, this is why can't we all just hold hands and sing Kumbaya and then be vulnerable and then all make this progress together and live in this beautiful, loving little planet. There you go. Imagine all the corduroy and purple sunglasses and all that. So anyway, there you go. There's my little moment. But I just think all this is really important, and I really like it. And it's been really important for me in my recovery too. So I'm just taking a quick look here through the rest of it. Yeah. Third paragraph. I look at this kind of vulnerability as the emotional equivalent of a trust fall. Is a great line and a very good depiction. Very good description of that. Yeah, I'm just going to wrap up on there. I kind of got my last point off on my last little hippie message. I want to leave it on that. So that's what I'm going to do. So I hope you like this reflection. Please share down in the description what stood out for you what's helped you be vulnerable with others, or what's a great example of a time where you were vulnerable with somebody or vice versa, and then what came up out of that. I'd love to read those in the comments, see what that experience was. Those shares could really help somebody else, and that's the whole point. So that would be great. And check out the rest of that description for other ways Spotlight Recovery can support you. We've got other self-help videos, getting a podcast and a newsletter going soon, which is going to be great. So keep an eye out for those. And a blog, they're all on our website. So check them all out down there. I do private recovery coaching with folks. So if you're saying to yourself, I want to be vulnerable, I want to learn how and get better with this, I just need that right person to be able to do it with, teach me how to get started, reach out to me. Let's see if I can be that person for you. I'm clearly very big on doing this vulnerability work and helping people in recovery. So I would be happy to see if I'm the right fit to do that with you. So contacts in the description, please reach out. And then last are ways that you can support the channel is doing all the YouTube things, like, share, and subscribe if you've been enjoying this content, because it's going to help us put out more and then carry that message to more people, which is the whole point. And then you can also donate, become a member, and getting yourself some branded merch. So that's all down there too. So go check it all out. But in the meantime, thank you for checking this video out today. Really hope you enjoyed it. Wishing you a blessed 24 in recovery, and we'll see you again tomorrow.